Hello, welcome to the Culinary Arts Kitchen here at Southern Adventist University. Today I want to share with you one of my favorite recipes, the corn, edamame, and quinoa salad. The edamame, which are actually just green soybeans, are a good source of protein. Frozen corn, black beans, green onions, red peppers, and then a dressing made out of lemon juice, tamari, olive oil, a little bit of Dijon mustard, and of course the quinoa, which we're going to cook first here in just a minute. It's very simple to put together. You don't have to cook anything except for the quinoa, not even the edamame or the corn. They're frozen, and I'll show you how we're going to deal with that in just a minute. The first thing we're going to do is wash the quinoa. I'm going to cook a cup of quinoa. You really don't need a cup because we're only going to use a cup of cooked quinoa. But I always cook more than what we need because I use it in so many things. I add it to salads, I add it to chili, I add it to any kind of a bowl that you're making. It's just something that I use a lot, and so whenever I cook it, I cook more than what I need for that particular recipe. So some bags or containers of quinoa will say that they're pre-rinsed. I still rinse it again. Make sure that you have a sieve that is very fine mesh, otherwise the quinoa goes through it and you lose it. But just give it a good rinse and let it drain. The next thing that people do wrong, and it's not their fault, the package tells you to do this, is that they use too much water. Every package I've ever seen says to use a cup of quinoa to 2 cups of water. That's too much water, and it ends up being very mushy, and it ruins the quinoa. So make sure your quinoa has drained. A little bit of water in there is okay, but you don't want to use the full 2 cups of water with it. So place it in your pot, and I use a cup of quinoa to 1.5 cups of water. If you use more than that, the quinoa ends up being mushy. Make sure that you have a lid that fits tightly. You don't want to lose all your moisture when you're cooking or it'll get too dry. To start with, you want to turn it up to bring it to a boil. And then as soon as it comes to a boil, you want to lower your heat down to a simmer. So turn it down real low and just let it sit and simmer for about 15 minutes. Okay, now you can see it is boiling, so we're going to turn it way down to where it's just barely simmering, and it'll take it a minute for it to come down to a simmer. There you go. Okay, we're just going to put the lid on. It's simmering, and we're going to put the lid on and let it set for 15 minutes, and then it will be ready to use. Anytime you work with canned beans, especially black beans, you want to drain and rinse them to get the brine off. Black beans especially, if you put them in without rinsing them well, the black juice or the gray juice will end up coloring your dish and give it an unappetizing look. But it also increases your sodium content, and you don't want to do that. So today we're going to open the can of beans, put it in a colander and rinse it with hot water. But we're also going to take the edamame that have been frozen and are still frozen, and the corn, and we're going to add that to the colander, and we're going to run hot water over all 3. That thaws your edamame, that thaws your corn, and that way you don't have to cook either one of them. You're just adding it to the salad after having been rinsed. So we'll start with the black beans. We'll put them on the bottom because you don't want the black bean juice to go through and color the edamame and the corn. And that was 1.5 cups of edamame and 3 cups of corn. I'm a little bit picky about my corn. I like to get the tenderest frozen corn that I can get because some frozen corn is very tough and hard to chew, and I just am really picky about that. So I look for the young corn, the tender corn, when I'm buying corn. And I just stir this up a little bit to make sure that all of it gets rinsed with the hot water. Have a nice colorful mix of yellow, green, and brownish black. Okay, I'm just gonna leave this here over the sink to drain a little bit longer while I prep some more vegetables. So we also have a cup of chopped red pepper, and I'm going to rinse that off before I cut it. I'm going to give you a little tip on cutting red peppers. Most people try to dig the core out, but instead of doing that, cut it like this. You end up with the core in the middle without anything around the outside. It makes it much easier. The next tip is, most people try to chop it like this. Always turn it so that the inside is facing you up, and it makes it much easier to chop. When you're chopping a pepper, or anything else for that matter, always come down on it using a sawing motion, a forward cutting motion, rather than just up and down. It makes it much easier to cut. You need about 1 cup of red pepper. You could use other colors, but the red is much sweeter than a green, so I always use red. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to slice up the green onions. So we'll give those a quick wash. If you have any tough outer edges that need to be peeled off, this is the time to do that. Some people don't like to use the white part, they only use the green part. I use both. So just line them up on your cutting board and cut your ends off. And again, use that slicing motion. You can do them, one at a time if you want to, or if you feel comfortable enough to do them several at a time, that's fine. Just slice through. If you try and go straight up and down, they're very hard to cut through. If you just slice, it's much, much easier. If you get in the habit of slicing everything, you'll find that your chopping is much less difficult. And I go up until I start feeling some resistance from the green, where it's starting to feel like it's a little bit tough. And that was 6 green onions. The next thing we're going to do is chop 4 cloves of garlic. My question to you is, what size cloves? Recipes never say what size cloves they're referring to. Are they calling a clove of garlic this size, or are they referring to a clove of garlic this size? If you make your recipe for this with 4 cloves of garlic this size, you're not even going to taste the garlic. This is a large clove of garlic. Sometimes they're even larger, but this is more the size that they're referring to. So you have to use your cook's judgment. If you have only cloves that are small, you're going to want to use a lot more than 4, because it would take probably 3 of these to equal 1 of these. So use your judgment always. The easiest way to peel a clove of garlic is to put it so that the concave is on the board like this. Put the flat edge of your knife on it and smash it. Cut your ends off, and it will peel much easier than if you didn't smash it first. If you want to use a garlic press for this, you can. I generally prefer to chop it. It's not that hard. It doesn't take that long. And actually, when you use a garlic press, you get a little bit more of a bitter flavor from the garlic because you're smashing it and getting all of the cells burst open rather than chopping. But it's up to you. Either one works. Okay, the only thing we have left to chop is the cilantro. So we're gonna chop some cilantro. Now, if you don't like cilantro, which some of my family don't, you can use parsley or you can leave it out entirely. Sometimes I just don't put anything in at all as far as fresh cilantro replacement. But we'll just take some of that off and just bundle it together in as tight a bunch as you can. And again, using that forward motion. If you have somebody in your family that will tolerate it but doesn't care for it very much, chop it up into smaller pieces because it's not as noticeable when it's in smaller pieces than when it's in larger pieces. So the only thing we have left to do is to mix the dressing and then mix it all together. So I'm going to mix together the dressing ingredients. So I've already squeezed out the lemon juice. It's 6 tablespoons of lemon juice, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, some people use low sodium soy sauce. I use tamari because it's gluten-free. And if you're using tamari, you don't have to use a low sodium tamari because it's not as high sodium as the soy sauce is. And then 2 tablespoons of Dijon mustard. And just mix it together. So it's 6 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1/4 cup of tamari or low sodium soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of smooth Dijon mustard, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And just give it a real quick whisk until it's smooth. And then it's ready to go once you get your ingredients mixed together. Okay, so now we're going to put it all together. The original recipe called for 1 cup of cooked quinoa, but I like quinoa and I like the fact that it adds a lot of protein to the recipe. So I actually use 2 cups of cooked quinoa. And you can see by using less water than the package calls for that you end up with a nice fluffy quinoa that's not sticking together. So there's 1 cup. And here's the 2nd cup. And again, you'll have some left over and you can use it in a salad or in chili or however you want to add it to your diet. It's just so useful in so many different ways. You can use it in desserts, you can use it in cakes, cookies. Just add it however you would like. Okay, so that's the quinoa. Then we will add the fully drained edamame, corn, and black beans. The red peppers. The green onions. The garlic. The cilantro. Give that a mix. And as you can see, it's not a lot of quinoa. If you only put half that much in, you don't even really see the quinoa. So I like adding that 2 cups instead of 1 cup. And I always like to read down through my recipe, make sure I've added everything. So, quinoa, corn, black beans, edamame, red pepper, cilantro, green onions, and garlic. So everything is in except for the dressing. I'm just giving this a whisk real quickly before I add it to this salad. Now this salad you can eat right away if you want to, but it tastes even better if you let it sit for a while. You can put it in the fridge if it's going to be very long. If you're going to eat it within an hour or so, you can let it sit out at room temperature. It doesn't have to be served cold, but it certainly isn't something you want to serve. You don't want to heat it up and serve it warm. As you can see, it makes a lot. The recipe says that a half a cup is a serving, but I don't know anybody that's tried it that's stopped with half a cup. In our house, we eat at least a cup per person. Half a cup has about 12 grams of protein. So if you eat a cup, you're getting around 20 to 24 grams of protein. And it's very nutritious, filling, and very yummy. I hope you try it, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for joining us today here in the Culinary Arts Kitchen.